All right, good morning, everyone. And on the line with us, we have Mark Capers. And Mark is going to deliver the InfraGard Insights. And the area is going to focus on today is UPS and generator backups. So here we go. Basics, I should say. Go ahead, Mark. Take it away.
Good morning, Joe. Good morning, everybody. Today on InfraGard Insights, I'm going to talk quickly about having a backup power plant, UPSs and generators. And as I get into that, as we heard from Tracy earlier this morning on the DHS report, here's some concerns about power as we come into the summer months. We had some record-breaking heat the last couple weeks in the Northeast, and those are causing record-breaking loads on the power infrastructure as people switch into their air conditioning systems. That puts an additional drain on the grid, so you see things like brownouts and blackouts. Very short duration, but nonetheless, it can impact you. Also, a couple other items in the news, due to some more stringent EPA regulation, you're seeing a lot of the energy sector scale back in their operations. A lot of this is, energy companies have announced that because to comply with the new requirements, they're going to have to shutter some coal plants, and that's going to have an impact on their ability to deliver power across the national grid, which is now more interconnected than it ever has been, as well as you had the Citizens Utility Board, which is a consumer advocacy group, forecasting to raise those energy costs at the consumer level from 40 to 60% by 2014, assuming that some other method can't be used to boost production. A lot of the new energy facilities as well, the construction is being slowed down by most things. No construction project typically goes on time or under budget. But you see things like Germany's announcing it's closing all its nuclear plants by 2022, and there are a lot of other not in my backyard sorts of things with windmills and other production in the U.S. So that's going to affect our ability to get power as much as generated. As Tracy had highlighted earlier, the increase in solar activity as the sun enters in a new cycle could have some nasty implications for the grid. Over the weekend, the sun had a mass coronal ejection on the far side of the sun that NASA watched, but as Joe McClellan, director of the Office of Electronic Reliability at the Federal Energy Commission, testified in May, if a solar storm at the same level as the solar storm in 1921, which is about a once in a 100-year incident, if it were to occur today, we would probably lose 300 extra high voltage transformers, and that would interrupt power to about 130 million people for possibly a period of years. We do not have the capacity to recover a grid in the event of a significant solar storm or an EMP from something like a nuclear device. So I would urge our utility brethren in that sector to help us get on that. Also, another facet of summertime, whether you live in the city, the suburbs, or the country, you never know when backhoes are going to strike. And we all have horror tales about when somebody digging in the wrong place takes out power or communication. So quickly going into what you should be doing for your sites and your organization to deal with power outages, both short-term and long-term, are, like many things we do in information security, have a plan, understand your requirements, and act accordingly. So make sure you have a power plan for every site that covers the contingencies for those sites. What elements at each site require emergency power and for how long? Do you need lighting to evacuate the facility? What does your keycard access do when the power goes out? All doors, according to fire code, have to fail open for exit. But if you have incident and emergency personnel or emergency operations skeleton crews that need to operate, they need to be able to get back into those facilities to operate the computer power and manage the shutdown. Do you have to have HVAC to maintain the environment equipment in the computer communications areas, and how is that done? Make sure your communications equipment is protected as well as your computer equipment, because we're in an interconnected world. And as Joe was saying, if everything's out on the cloud and your router isn't plugged into the same UPS as your servers are, you're kind of out of luck. Understand what sites require extended uptime without power. And again, this is more of a, UPSs are good for getting you shut down safely. If you need to be able to operate for an extended amount of time, you're going to need to look at a generator solution. Typically, it's gasoline, diesel. You need to understand how much fuel that you can store locally, how long that fuel is going to last. How do you replenish that fuel during a local disaster? If you have a flood, hurricane, or something that knocks out other bits of critical infrastructure, and you can last for a week on diesel. How do you get a diesel delivery if there's 4 feet of snow on the ground and the roads aren't going to open for 7 days, and you've got a 4-day window? So in either of those above events, make sure that you tie what your site power plan is to your disaster recovery plan, and that your decision tree is appropriately kicked off. Understand what your telecommunications and other third-party providers do in the event of a failure in a particular location. If you're in the building next door to AT&T and they're your service provider and they're on the same grid and they go lights out and you have power and they don't, it may not matter what your plan is. So make sure that they have a plan that's at least coordinated with yours or aligns with yours. Talking about UPSs for a minute, I mentioned that UPSs are basically a countdown timer. For most sites, that is true. There's so much computer equipment now that most branch offices, even small UPSs that are cheap, they don't last terribly long. They'll give you a few hours of power, even with extra batteries. So when the UPSs flip over, that is a countdown timer for your decision tree, and your decision process fall down should resemble something like, you're going to lose lights, power goes out. At that point, your UPS kicks on, and the time on the clock is a lot shorter than it really appears. So you have to decide quickly whether you're going to use that UPS time to safely shut down all your computer operations, or get a status from your facilities about the on-site generation capability or the local utility to find out how long the power is going to be down. So every site should have a local designee who can assess the situation, contact the utility for status update, and execute a decision process with the power plan. And probably that individual should be the same for your disaster recovery plan, and those plans should tie together. Other issues to consider when you create these UPS systems and on-site generation. If you have a failover to generator, and usually they're cascaded, so you have some sort of intelligent power management system to go from street power to battery to diesel, make sure you test all those elements. We had a data center for a client. It was a mission critical application, and it was for the federal government, and part of that critical infrastructure, we had upgraded their power capacity because we wanted to put in a longer diesel capacity. We had built the system, tested everything, and brought it live. Unfortunately, the ground fault detection relays had a lengthy fail open period when it switched from one to the other. Street power blipped for about 5 seconds, and then that was enough to flip it over to battery. The battery started up the generators, then saw that the street was back on, tried to flip back, the ground fault protection kicked off, and everything went dark. So you want to make sure you test every element and make sure that you plan for all possible contingencies. And
right, Mark,
that's power in a nutshell.
That is a lot of information. I've got some questions for you. All right.
Sure.
So let's go back to the beginning here. This solar storm. All right. I think back in 1921 or something like that. Is that what it was? Yeah. All right. So what is the actual potential for something like that to happen in today's day and age?
Pretty great. I mean, the sun has cycles of activity, and I'm just trying to read through some of the NASA stuff on it. I mean, it's literally NASA stuff. They've put a couple of satellites out there now that we can actually monitor 360 degrees around the sun, where, historically, you can look up and see the sun, and that's what we got. But apparently, things like there's something called the Carrington event, which is the largest solar flare in recorded history. That was 1859. And then you had the storm in 1921, and we had a pretty bad one in 1989 that took out the Canadian Quebec power grid. So these things tend to be 30 to 100 years apart, 50 to 100 years apart, I'd say. And they have great potential because of the way our grids are structured to take out transformers. The power lines actually act as an antenna. So when the sun flashes, it sends the current, it's like a lightning strike. It just sends the current right down into the transformers and blows the transformers.
That's some new information, I think, for our members to take away here. That actually in 1989, there was an event, all right, and it did have a negative impact on the resources of the country of Canada.
Yes, one of the links that I have is actually a report done for the Oak Ridge National Laboratory on that event, as well as some other white papers associated with that. The other analogy, I'm using solar storms as one example. If you look at counterproliferation, nuclear weapons can be used to affect the same type of situation. If someone were to do an airburst of a nuclear weapon, it would cause an EMP and have much the same effect. So that's something that keeps our friends in customs and DoD very busy on their anti-nuclear proliferation efforts.
Oh, I wouldn't doubt that. I wouldn't doubt that at all. All right, Mark, that's a great talk. Wow, a lot of information there. All right, and we look forward to seeing you next week. All right.
Sure thing. Thank you, Joe.
Thanks again.